How's it going, everybody? Welcome to a new stream that I'm dubbing GEARHAULICS, where we're obsessively addicted to the gear that we haul into the backcountry. Today, I am joined by two of YouTube's most famous backpackers and myself. I've got Jared, aka Snackbox, coming to you from the Chicago area, and his channel is Outside Comfort Zone. And we also have Jason Huckabee, aka Huck from Huck Outdoors, who's actually a local to me, and we definitely need to hang out more. So how's it going
For
tonight,
sure.
gentlemen? How you doing?
Doing well, doing
Doing
well.
doing
All right,
great.
and
Vikings won tonight, so I'm
Yeah,
happy.
it was
there you go.
insane. That was really cool. Yep.
Yeah.
And I, of course, am Dave from Dave Off Grid, but you probably already know that because you're probably watching it on my channel because that's where it's going to be published. So tonight on the debut episode, I figured we'd jump into quilts, specifically top quilts, and just kind of do a deep dive into it, get a roundtable discussion going, and let's just jump right into it. The first bullet point that I have for you guys tonight is what exactly is a top quilt. So just as a little bit of a preface here, not every episode is just going to be introductory type stuff. We are going to look at some things from a top level, and then as we get into future episodes, we might do deeper dives into different vendors or specific pieces of gear. So tonight is really just going to be just talking about top quilts in general. So I'm going to kick this one off, just kind of do a light overview of it, and then kick it over to you, gentlemen. So exactly, what is a top quilt? So there's three main different pieces of gear that you might be thinking of for your warmth layer when you're out there when you're sleeping. You've got a top quilt, you've got a sleeping bag, and I said three, and I can't really think of a third one, so maybe nothing. Maybe just your jacket or something like that. But basically, a top quilt differs from something like a sleeping bag in that you don't have a back to it, right? You're relying mostly on your mat or your pad for your insulating factors in order to get heat to radiate back to you. They generally weigh less because they don't have a back, and I've never seen one, but quilts generally don't have a hood either. So that's kind of just the basics at a very top level, other than the fact that you have pad straps that kind of keep it to your mat or your pad. What do you guys think that I missed there? Because I'm sure I missed a bunch.
Well, I know one thing that you missed there is the draft collars that some do have as well. They don't have the hood, but they do get the draft collars.
Yeah, and a draft collar, that's a really important feature for a lot of people who tend to sleep in colder environments. It's basically sort of an extra ring of down that goes around your neck, so it keeps, as Huck's the name of the draft collar implies, it's a collar that keeps the air from coming out. And I like to think of a quilt as sort of if you think about it as like a blanket with a foot box is probably the best way to kind of frame it. So I think you nailed it with that. And then typically they tend to be lighter, but also sort of roomier, I would argue, because you don't have you don't always have the zipper on them, although there are certain quilts that will zip or some that will button, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those are great points. Definitely, in my opinion, too. Even like the ones that are not as wide, and we'll get into like widths and lengths in a little bit. But quilts just seem in general to be less restrictive than your standard bags, and a lot of bags are being cut in sort of that mummy shape nowadays. So it's kind of hard to even get a standard cut for a really nice bag. So it definitely feels like you're kind of wrapped up a little bit more in a bag.
Yeah, there's certainly those poles, right? That you've got very few middle ground sort of sleeping bags and the like. Although there are some sort of semi-rectangular ones from Sea to Summit, or there's the Big Agnes line where you slide your sleeping bag into a sleeve in the bottom of the sleeping bag, and then it kind of keeps it stuck to the pad. So it's not really a mummy bag, and it's not really the other. But this isn't of course, a stream that's about the other sleeping bags, but I think you nailed it there, that typically people who are new to the quilt or sleeping bag world really are kind of on these two poles, where you've got the mummy bags on one end, and then you've got those quilts that are much less restrictive on the other, but they also have much more exposure or risk of exposure to wind and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's true. And that's a great point that you mentioned there, Snackbox, about a lot of the systems that you're buying now. There are some like there's a Zen Bivy who makes a system where it's, you know, kind of a combo of different quilts and or sleeping bags. But I really like that addition of sort of like a fitted sheet where it kind of like wraps around your pad and really doesn't move it anywhere. So that's kind of what the pad straps do, but sometimes they slip or get loose, so you kind of turn over and you introduce a draft or something like that. So I really like that aspect of some of the sleeping bags that are out there, and I really wish that Quilts kind of introduced that a little bit more. But okay, great stuff there. Let's move into our second topic here, and sweet, just clicking on it ends up working pretty well. So we'll talk about weights now. And again, you know, we don't have to be restrictive here, gentlemen, as far as like, you know, not talking about something else or doing like a versus or kind of name dropping. It's all kind of like free game. In general, what I've found is that the weights overall of a quilt, obviously, as we had mentioned, are a little bit lighter to a lot lighter than your traditional sleeping bags. There are two major types of fills that I've seen as well. You've got your traditional down, and then you've got more of the synthetic fill, right? And synthetic traditionally has been a little bit more on the heavier side. There are a lot of advancements in that area as well now. But generally speaking, in today's day and age, we're still kind of trending more towards a type of down for your warmth to weight ratio being the best. So think of down as kind of like your lightest option to stay the warmest when you're out there. So you've got two different types, right? You've got your fill weight, your net fill weight, and then the overall weight of the quilt. So the net fill is going to be the overall weight of the down feathers or whatever type of you know, insert is in there, and then the overall weight is with all the other fabric that's kind of tied into it. I'll leave it there. I do have a couple other points that I would put in there, but I'll let you guys kind of have at this one.
Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I was just gonna sort of add to that. The synthetic versus down situation is also complicated by the idea that the you know, synthetic when wet will retain its insulating quality, whereas down will lose it. And so there's this sort of, if you're starting to look into some of the more serious quilts, then you have this sort of likelihood that you're going to go with some more exposed tents, that sort of thing. So when you're thinking of buying this, you really want to think kind of long term. Are you going to be in sort of a tarp situation later on, because the quilt itself will affect the quilt you need will be affected by the rest of that. And if you're kind of cutting weight, and the last thing, I'll just be real quiet about this and move quickly, but the sort of the volume is also important, because the packability, if we're talking weights and sort of fill, a 950 fill will pack, depending on the my quilt is 650, and it'll pack to the size of like 2 grapefruits. It's really remarkably small. How about you, Huck? What do you think?
Well, with the weights, you're going to see a lot with the fill power, like Dave said earlier. On the budget side, you're going to see some around like 650, 700 fill, and then going all the way up to like 1,000 fill down, which I just got in a new quilt. And it, like you said, the packability, the more down fill there is there, the easier that thing packs down. And it's amazing that, like you said, with yours, just how small they pack down, and compared to my old sleeping bag too.
All right, so I'm not sure if there's anything else on weights that we wanted to. Oh, I wanted to throw in a couple other things here. And one is just kind of like general weights to expect within certain ranges. And obviously, this is a lot of guesswork here, but it really depends on the type of fill. And we're going to get to fill powers and everything a little bit later on. But I think in general, like I have a 20 degree right here that I snagged from UGQ, and that's somewhere around a little bit over 20 ounces. But I know Huck just told me that he's got one that is like a pound, so that's really great.
That's right. It's 15 ounces.
That's insane for 20 degrees. That's super light. And then I have a 30 degree here from Outdoor Vitals, and that's actually about the same weight as the UGQ. So it really depends on the types of fabrics that you get and the fill power, like we had just mentioned. And then you can get just like a cheap one off of Amazon. Like I have a Nature Hike sleeping bag / quilt, and that weighs around 19 ounces, but it's really more for warmer weather. So I think particularly for down, you're kind of looking somewhere around the 1 pound range, but it can go up into like the 20s. But anything else on that one before we move on?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. That, you know, you're looking somewhere in the ballpark of like a pound, couple of pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Let's quickly move over into the widths and lengths. Not a ton to say here, particularly with top quilts. And in general, you know, I think another differing point here, or something that's different from like a sleeping bag versus a quilt, is the fact that sleeping bags tend to just kind of come from a manufacturer. They're not really customizable that much, other than maybe like a standard length that you can choose from, like a short, regular, or long length. Quilts, you get into a lot more customizing options here. I think we can all agree on. And it's actually the reverse. Other than maybe like Thermarest, it's really difficult to find, I guess, just like stock stuff. You can find them, but I think when you go to a quilt, you're a little bit more inclined to customize it yourself. So some examples that I would say, just from, you know, like throwing out some names here: UGQ and Enlightened Equipment. You know, you can customize the type of foot box that you get, and then like a width could be anywhere from like 54 to 58 or 60 inches, which is all the way around your shoulders up the top. And then most of the time it's going to end up being tapered, so it's wider at your shoulders and then a little bit more narrow, but you can pay to make it just like straight all the way top to bottom. And then lengths are usually anywhere from like 72 inches, somewhere around there, which is about 6 feet, all the way up to, again, like 78, possibly even more if you really wanted to go, or you're really super long. But what do you guys think on weights or widths and lengths?
Well, as far as widths go, I'd always suggest doing it as a wide. Unless you're in a hammock, you can get away with a regular width. But being a ground dweller in a tent, in a bivvy, anything like that, you're going to want wide. Especially if you're doing a lot of like tossing and turning throughout the night, then maybe even extra wide. Some companies do offer that.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely a wide for sure.
Yeah, I think that to reinforce a little bit of what you said there, Huck, is that if you're the type of person who would prefer a quilt anyway, chances are good that it's for the reason you just described, right? That you're a tosser or turn, or I guess if we're going to be playing this in England, I probably shouldn't say you're a tosser, right? If you toss and turn, particularly because if you toss and turn, you might be going to a quilt for that reason anyway, because mummies tend to get kind of wrapped around you. So it would only make sense to spring for the widest possible, because that's going to give you the most sort of coverage for the type of sleeping you tend to do.
Yeah.
Right on. All right, great points, gentlemen. Let's move over into the next category, which I have in this rapid fire list that we've got, and that is going to be the price points. What kind of price points to expect? Again, to kick it off, I think it's highly volatile. It really depends on what customizing options you have. So, you know, again, if you're going a little bit cheaper and you're doing a custom quilt, you're obviously going to go with either an 800, 850 fill down. And it really depends on, you know, the type of denier for the fabric that you're going with, as well as any other kind of add-on options that you're going with. And then the temperature rating also affects it as well. So if you're going with a warmer weather quilt, you can probably generally expect to spend a little bit less than if you were to go for something that's going to get you down into, you know, the teens or, you know, 0 degrees. So it's hard to give a ballpark number there, but can you guys take a stab at some of the price ranges you can expect?
I've noticed they go from anywhere like maybe like hammock gear or something like that. You're going to get a budget one around maybe $250, and then going up the more customizable options you do, you're going to go up to maybe $500 or so, depending on your fill power. Say you want to have a custom design. I've seen some companies do that where they'll do like I've seen one actually looks like a coffee bag on the outside, or some of the camo prints as well. Some of those, like, they'll get a little bit pricey.
Yeah, I think typically speaking, this is a really interesting question, because the the ranges, I know that Pariah Outdoors has one that's maybe 150, somewhere in that ballpark, and you can maybe get some less expensive ones. But then you can also find some that are wildly expensive. I've seen some upwards of maybe $600 at like Feathered Friends. And it's worth kind of knowing too. I know that we're going to talk more about the types of fill, but the higher the number of fill, the lighter it is. And so the last thing that I'd say about sort of price points that's really interesting here is that you had mentioned earlier, Dave, that a lot of the bigger manufacturers don't really do a lot of quilts. So even REI sort of tested the water with one quilt, and it wasn't very successful overall. And part of it is because of the history of these, that quilts typically were started, like they were brought to backpacking largely by thru hikers from cottage companies or sort of mom and pops, or even making them. There was sometime it was really popular to do the Costco quilt, where you'd buy the $40 Costco down blanket, and there were YouTube tutorials for it. So now I think people just don't believe that a bigger company can really put together a great quilt. Or at least if you're going to spend that kind of money, you might as well get one that's customizable or sort of local, smaller company.
All right. So one last thing that I wanted to add in here about the price points is you really got to hunt for the deals. Like, again, you can go super cheap on Amazon, get the Nature Hike or something like that. Not going to be the best quality, but those kind of hover that, and like the Aegis Max kind of hovers around $100. You can get those for a really warm weather type of quilt. But you can search for like warehouse deals, garage sales, and find some really good deals, stuff that could be like under $200, with little to no wear on it as well. So I'd highly recommend those as well. All right, let's move over real quick into the next topic, which is going to be to talk about the fabrics. And I'm going to lean on you guys a little bit more on this one, because I really don't know anything outside of denier. So I know that for the deniers, I've seen it as low as 7, which I wouldn't recommend because that is super paper thin, all the way up to somewhere around 20. Might go a little bit higher, but usually it's somewhere like 7, 10, or 20. And if you're thinking about denier again, the lower in number you go, the thinner the material gets. So 20 is actually going to feel a little bit thicker than a 10D, so it's going to be a little bit more durable. But do you guys know what exactly is the fabric usually for the outside shell? Is it just a nylon, or what do they usually go with?
Yeah, I think it's typically different types of nylon or polyester cloth. Generally, it's going to be synthetic for pretty obvious reasons, that the organic materials are going to absorb water much easier. But I also think kind of to talk a little bit about the deniers there, Dave, is that those fabrics, it's important to draw a really careful balance between sort of weight and comfort, because the lower denier will be lighter as well. So they'll typically be more expensive, even though they'll be less durable. So you want to kind of think about, again, kind of taking it back to the whole system. How likely are you to snag it on a tree branch, for example? Are you sleeping in is there going to be something that might tear it? And if so, then you want to adjust accordingly. But if you're sleeping in something really light with a floor and bathtub and everything, get the lightest one, especially if you take care of stuff like you do, Dave.
And I've got my newest quilt is 70 inner, 70 outer. I haven't felt like I was going to rip it, but then my first quilt I've got, which is, I believe, 10D inner, 15D outer, and I've actually sliced both. Both have tenacious tape on there holding it up. That's
I can tell you right now. I'm bringing this back out. This is the UGQ. It's got 20, I think, on both the inside and the outside. And my fiance snagged it in the zipper on one of our car camping trips up in the Redwoods. And I about nearly had a heart attack because she got it kind of wrapped up.
You mean ex-fiance?
Yeah, right. No, she pulled an old Franks and Beans, if you know that one, from Something About Mary, and I was like, I had to look away. I was like, whatever you got to do, just kind of like snake it back through. But
did you ask her how the beans got above the Franks?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a heart attack on that one. So yeah, I mean, a good roundup there. Great input, guys. I would agree. A lot of times they'll end up going with a thinner denier on the inside, but you really have to weigh that kind of in between, like, like, is it going to rip? Are you thinking about it all the time? Is another thing is just like a mentality about your gear, like Snackbox had mentioned there. You really have to think about all those factors when you're purchasing it. And unfortunately, unless you kind of rent gear, you really have to like go out there and use it to know kind of like how tough you are in your gear. But great roundup on that one, fellas. The next one we'll get into, which we had talked about a little bit before, is the types of fills. So we had mentioned, somewhere around 800 to 850, all the way up to 1,000 fill power. I'll briefly preface this one by saying, like, the biggest difference there is the type of fill, and then there's also synthetic, right? But the fill really kind of equates to the type of feather and how big the feather is in the down, if you're going with down. So if it's 800, it's going to be a little bit smaller, so they have to use a little bit more to achieve the same type of warmth, compared to something that is like 1,000, which is larger feathers, usually is a little bit lighter, but basically doesn't take up as much of that net fill weight in order to keep you warm. But I'm sure I messed that one up, so if you guys can clarify, let me know.
Well, I just know that there's, besides the fill, there is the synthetic, and that's came a long way from like the old synthetic sleeping bags. You've got the Apex synthetic insulation, and then other companies are using the Up insulation, which is synthetic that sort of mimics the down and the packability.
Yeah, those are getting to be much nicer. So it's not at all that same, the stuff that even 15 years ago when I started backpacking, it's miles ahead of that. It's really pretty crazy. But also there's kind of on the other side too, there's a new type of down or treatment that they've been doing to down that makes it hydrophobic, and that's what they use in the Thermarest Chorus quilt. And I think even the Vesper, I think that might be a sleeping bag, but it might be a quilt. But the Thermarest line uses this hydrophobic down, which sheds the water much faster. So it will retain some of that insulating ability, but it's still very different. So if it ultimately kind of comes back to price at the end of the day with both of those, which down typically will be less expensive, or more expensive rather. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jared. And it slipped my mind. Yeah, the DWR coating on some of them, and I really don't know if it can be revived, sort of like a coat can. I'm not sure. Maybe not. I don't think that it can. So I'm not sure if it wears off over time, or what. But yeah, some companies are going with that to repel some of that water, particularly in our Gossamer Gear The One tent, which has ridiculous condensation issues, might I add. That is a sneak peek for the next episode too.
That's the new rainforest tent.
I was going to call it the Rainmaker.
All right.
There you go. All right. Next topic up here, we've got the pros and the cons. So for me, obvious pros again are that quilt is a little bit lighter. You don't have a backing on it. What that basically means is that traditionally with sleeping bags, especially if you have a fill which is down in sleeping bags, you're going to end up crushing that insulation on your back or your stomach, whatever you end up leaning on your pad, which in effect renders it a little bit more useless, but you still have that bag just kind of wrapped around you to insulate that heat. So a big pro is that it is lighter. The con obviously is that you don't get that cocoon feel, right? You're not like completely swaddled. If you're that kind of person who just likes everything kind of wrapped around them and a hood at night, that can definitely insulate you a little bit better outside of buying other things or like wearing your puffy to sleep or buying a balaclava or whatever. So those are my pros and cons. What do you guys got?
I think one of the hidden pros is that I've been using a quilt for years now, and one of the hidden pros is that when you're at camp, because it operates really similarly to a blanket, they're really nice to have and kind of sit around and drink your tea or coffee or whatever you're going to drink at the end of the day and kind of watch the sunset. So they work a lot better for that, and you can kind of drape them over somebody or share it with a friend, what have you. So I think that that's a real advantage with it. And one of the big con is that if in my experience, I kind of wake up a few more times throughout the night because it doesn't have that cocoon feel. So it's often I fall asleep quickly, but it is noticeable that 2 times a night I'll catch a cold draft on my lower back or something and wake you right up.
And that's probably the biggest con I find with it is the drafts. I don't get like I've got one that's got the pull string, so it's got like a little tiny hole. I don't really get drafts from that, but it is from the sides. Even if I'm have it tucked in with the pad straps, every once in a while, if I toss really hard or something, on my back is going to be a draft.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
one of the biggest pros, you guys have covered it, but one of the other pros is the packability of the quilts as you're going through, and it's just so much easier to pack it into your backpack.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'll second Snackbox's remark there too. And it's to take it a little bit further. It's really like if you have the option to go with an open foot box, there's a pro and con to that as well. If you have an open foot box, it might be a little bit harder to cinch that down in colder environments, but it does enable you to open it all the way up, like Jared was talking about, and just kind of like drape it around you when you're at camp. So that's definitely another added bonus there. The next to last category is going to be pro tips, and there might not be a lot to talk about with this one other than what we had just mentioned, and just kind of like opening it up. But do you guys have any pro tips on how to use a quilt, maybe how to configure it so that it works a little bit better, maybe to eliminate some of those draft points? Any ideas on that? I think you're on mute there, Snack.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, making sure the dogs don't bark and startle me again. So this one is going to be sort of a hot take, and people are probably going to light me up in the comments. But those little straps that keep your quilt stuck to the sleeping pad, lose those right away, because what happens is when you roll over, those become pinch points. So the draft, it just opens a draft between the 2 points where the straps are. So instead, actually, what I find is better is you get rid of those, and then you do try to sort of wrap yourself cocoon style, and you'll typically stay in it with far fewer drafts. So getting rid of those straps can really help, because then you can make sure it doesn't sort of bounce off you as easy. But a lot of people probably disagree with that.
Yeah, and he's talking about, like, specifically here, folks, about the fact that the way that the buckles are situated, you can kind of like buckle it behind you, more like a traditional sleeping bag, and they also have usually a cinch or a button around your neck, so you can wear it that way, which I should have done the first time I brought out that UGQ quilt and forgot my pad straps, but idiotically didn't do. But what do you got on that one, Hook?
I would say just go along with Jared, where making sure it's a wide, because that way you can do that, wrap it around you.
Right.
I've seen too many people that get that first quilt trying to save some money by going with a regular width, and then it's not going to work for you.
Yeah, I would second that. And I would also say go with a long. I always go long and wide. I'm not even that tall. I'm like 5'9" on a good day. I'm like somewhere in between 5'8" and 5'9", but I'm still getting the longest one that I can possibly get, because particularly again with a quilt, it's just nicer to be able to like get underneath it. So if you can buy one that's a little bit longer and just kind of like tuck your head underneath, then you don't have to worry about your face freezing as much at night. Okay. Last thing here, guys, is the final verdict. Are you for quilts or are you against them? I personally am all for them. I, like a lot of other people, started off with a sleeping bag and quickly found out that I toss and turn a lot. I'm a side sleeper. I'm a stomach sleeper. And, you know, a hood when you're on your stomach or side is kind of just useless. And I was just getting like wrapped up in it, so quickly migrated over to a quilt for all of those reasons. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm all for them. I love them. I don't think I'll ever go back, but I also toss and turn quite a bit, and I side sleep, so the mummies don't work, because that hood actually gets in the way and starts leading to a lot more tangling. So 100% I love them. I can also appreciate if somebody else is never going to go back to a quilt, and I've heard that from people before, especially if they're really calm sleepers. They tend to or back sleepers even, they can be tougher on those folks.
Right.
Yeah, back in, I think it was 2018 is when I got my first quilt, and I switched over from a Kelty Cosmic Down bag, and I'll never go back. It's just so much more comfortable. I have a better night's sleep in the quilt than I did ever in a sleeping bag.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, guys, that's it. The first episode is officially in the can.
There it
I
is.
want to thank
Yeah.
both of my co-hosts for this evening, Jared from Outside Comfort Zone and Jason from Huck Outdoors. If you guys want to do some shameless plugs for your channel, now is the time. We'll start with you, Jared. Let people know where to find you on all the different socials.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Backcountry Champion. So follow me over there. I do some stupid videos that are sometimes kind of funny. And then check out Outside Comfort Zone, and specifically take a look at the Colorado Trail videos. Those are sort of my niche, I guess. I don't know. That's probably shouldn't use French words this late at night, but yeah, that's sort of my angle. I really like talking about that trail. It's where this photo behind me was taken. So check out those videos if you please.
And you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and it's always at Huck Outdoors. YouTube is going to be more videos, lots of hiking, backpacking, fishing. Instagram, I've got a few reels up, but not as many videos up on there. More photos, and still get to see the trips there as well.
Is
Perfect.
now
Thanks,
when
guys.
should I bring up my OnlyFans now or at the end?
We'll save that for a different cast a little bit
All right,
later.
I'll plug that on the next one.
All right. Well, thanks a lot again, guys, for joining me tonight. I'll also post the social media stuff down in the links below. I didn't prep that for this one. I'll get it right the next time, guys. I apologize. But thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Take care.